All right. Well, good morning. We are continuing in our conversation through the Sermon on the Mount, and um, we're now transitioning into Matthew chapter 6, and we're calling this, the good life, because what Jesus is providing for us is the strategies in order to live the good life of the kingdom. We could be saved and still not live the good life because we're not working from the standpoint of the ethics and the values of the kingdom, which we talked about last week. And we'll piggyback on some of that this week. But for the sake of time, let us just jump right on into our teaching this morning. So if you got your Bibles, turn to Matthew chapter 6. Matthew chapter 6. And we'll start with verse 1. We'll start with Matthew chapter 6, verse 1. Now, we're going to read all the way down to verse 8, and then we'll jump from verse 8, and we'll read from verse 16 down to verse 18. Matthew chapter 6, verse 1. So if someone wouldn't mind reading our verses for us, please.
Be careful not to do your acts of righteousness before men, to be seen by them. If you do, you will have no reward from your Father in heaven. So when you give to the needy, do not announce it with trumpets, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and on the streets, to be honored by men. I tell you the truth, they have received their reward in full. But when you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret. Then your Father, who sees what is done in secret, will reward you. And when you pray, do not be like the hypocrites, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and on the street corners to be seen by men. I tell you the truth, they have received their reward in full. But when you pray, go to your room, close the door, and pray to your Father, who is unseen. Then your Father, who sees what is done in secret, will reward you. And when you pray, do not keep on babbling like pagans, for they think they will be heard because of their many words. Do not be like them, for your Father knows what you need before you ask him. When you fast, do not look somber as the hypocrites do, for they disfigure their faces to show men they are fasting. I tell you the truth, they have received their reward in full. But when you fast, put oil on your head and wash your face, so that it will not be obvious to men that you are fasting, but only to your Father who is unseen. And your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you.
Thank you, Troy. Thank you, Troy. So when you read this opening text here, on the surface, what is it? What is it? Just in the hearing of it, that Jesus. What is the case that he's laying out?
That when you help and serve others, you don't have to tell everybody about it.
Yep. Very good. Thank you.
Your real reward will come from him.
Very good. Yep. Listen, you ain't got to try to make a show of it, right? And here's what Jesus is laying out. Just what Shayla said. He's laying out two contrasts: religious hypocrisy versus authentic Christianity. Religious hypocrisy versus authentic Christianity. The hypocrisy of doing stuff before others versus the authenticity of knowing that whatever I do, my daddy sees me. He gonna take care of me. I ain't got to impress you. That's the difference between religious hypocrisy and authentic Christianity. And Jesus lays out this case for them 2,000 years ago and for us today. Now, there was a survey that was done by the Barna Group. And I don't know if many of you know Barna, but they've been around for a long time. They're probably the most credible organization in the Christian world in terms of doing surveys and just getting a sense and a pulse about faith and where people are in faith, how they perceive faith, how non-believers view the church. And I did a survey of non-believers, non-Christians. And in the survey, they asked me, why are you resistant? Why are you resistant to faith? And 85% of the people that they surveyed believe that Christians are hypocritical. 85% of the non-believers that they surveyed said, I ain't fooling with God because the people that represent them, they're hypocrites. Any thoughts or comments just about that statistic? Any surprises? Anybody shocked?
No, I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised. Not at all. It's
Not at
sad,
all.
but I'm not. Yeah.
They got the same heart that they had back in the day.
Yep. So let me ask you guys this question. So when you think about
in going to some of the churches that I went to younger, I kind of
Shayla, we could barely hear you.
Yeah, Shayla, get closer to your mic, please.
Is this better?
Yeah, that's
Yes.
that's night and day.
I was saying growing up and going to some of the churches that I went to younger, I kind of agree with them. I've seen a lot of hypocrisy within the church. So I feel like I probably would have been a part of that 85%.
So how would we describe, if you were asked to give it, this for anyone, if you were asked to give a definition of what hypocrisy is, what definition would you come up with?
Well, my experience would be you see people doing things, but then their actions and their attitudes are totally opposite. Like, prime example, you see new people who never been to church come into the church, and they get at that front door and people just treat them like, oh, no, they not coming in here looking like that. And oh, no, they not. But then when they see them on the street, it's like, come to my church and, come in and like that. They tell you to come to the church, but when you come to the church, you being new in the church, they downplay you like you are dirty because you came and dressing the way that you do when you go out to parties because you don't know.
Yeah. They get mad because a sinner came to church.
Right, exactly. You know what I'm talking about.
Oh, I know.
Dave, when I think about that, I think about actors.
Yeah.
People who are acting, great actors.
Yep. So like that's good because the world has a definition of hypocrisy that says it's a person who pretends to have virtue, values, certain beliefs, and then they act the complete opposite of what they pretend to have. But Marvin touches on a really, really good point here, because the Greek word that Jesus uses, hypocrisy, it's really a word that comes from the Greek theater, and it means to wear a mask, someone acting out the part of a character in a play. It's a person who puts on a mask and they speak lines from behind that mask. They just play acting. They never really believed in the first place. They're just play acting. And this word for hypocrite, it appears 27 times in the New Testament. And again, it's about someone acting out their part, like a character in a play. The Greeks, and this is the predominant use of this word in Jesus's day. It's people who are basically play acting. When it comes to faith, a hypocrite is a person who masks their real self while they play a part for their audience. They mask their real selves. So they put on a mask of piety, a mask of faith, a mask of religion. And then they say the lines that they think they ought to be saying as a Christian. Well, I'm supposed to act this way. I'm supposed to say this, but it's just play acting for them. It's not genuinely driven from the heart. And this is what is trying to identify and emphasize in this portion of scripture in the beginning part of chapter 6. Because here, remember last week, we talked about the ethics of the kingdom. And Jesus told us that the ethics of the kingdom is really about this: loving God with everything that's in me. It's loving others. And then it's me. So that the ethics, the value of the kingdom, it's God, it's others, and then myself. Jesus is he's identifying for us in this portion of scripture that this attitude of hypocrisy, it's really a violation of the ethics of the kingdom, because what it does is it puts me in front of God. Because now I'm doing stuff to get attention. I'm doing stuff to get something to satisfy me rather than satisfying God and satisfying others. It gets down to the inward motivations within people's heart. And when there's an inward motivation that puts anything before God and anything before others, then that is a violation of the ethics of the kingdom. And if it's a violation of the ethics of the kingdom, then I am being hypocritical, because I am not representing what I say I've embraced as a citizen of the kingdom. So let's jump in and let's kind of dissect this text of what Jesus has laid out for us to get a better understanding of what is the difference between being hypocritical and being authentic with our faith. So here we'll start off with Matthew 6:1 again. And there's two interesting words that he uses here. The first word he says there, he says, be careful. Be careful. This word, be careful, it means to turn towards. It means to pay attention to be attentive to take heed. And it always precedes a command. So what Jesus is saying is, listen, you better listen up. I'm not just giving this to you as a suggestion. This isn't just a passing thought. When Jesus says be careful, in the context of the language of the day, folks were understanding what Jesus is about to lay down is something that they need to be. Listen, you need to give ear to this. You need to stop what you're doing. You need to pay attention to what I'm about to say. And what he says is, don't do your acts of righteousness. Don't do your religious devotions. That word acts of righteousness, it means religious devotions. Don't try to play out your commitment to God in front of people. And the motive for playing it out in front of people is what? To be
seen by them.
To be seen by men. And then he says, listen, he lays out this broad framework. He says, if that's what you're about, then If you want to play out your religious piety, your spirituality, if you want to play it out, if you want to put on the mask, play the role so you could be seen like an actor on a stage saying their lines, if that's what you want to be about, all right. When the people applaud you, that's the only reward you're going to get. Because if you do, the text tells us, what will you not receive?
No reward from your Father in heaven.
No reward from your Father in heaven. Now we gonna take our time and dissect this. So look at the Message. And most of you know I'm not really a big fan of the Message, because the Message is not a biblical translation. It's a biblical interpretation, right? There's a difference between a translated text and then an interpretive text. The Message is interpretive. It's not a pure, clean translation. But this particular verse in the Message, I think captures the essence of Matthew 6:1. Be especially careful when you are trying to be good, so that you don't make a performance out of it. It gets right to the heart of hypocrisy, right to the heart of play acting. It might be good theater, but the God who made you won't be applauding.
Wow.
Ain't good?
Woo, man.
That's good.
Oh, man.
So watch this. Jesus never said that his followers must not do good deeds in the presence of others. He didn't say don't do good deeds in the presence of others. That's not what he's saying. He's always wanted his people, his followers, to do good deeds. How would you compare this statement with chapter 5? I think it's verse 17, where he talks about being salt and light and letting your good deeds be seen by all men, so that they may glorify your Father which is in heaven. So in chapter 5, Jesus says, listen, be salt and light. Live your life in such a way so that people can see your good deeds. And when they see your good deeds, they'll give God some glory. How does that balance with here? Jesus is saying, listen, don't put on a show for people, to be seen by people. Because if that's your motivation, then you ain't getting no applause from God. How do those two verses balance with each other?
They balance in each other because they're basically showing that balance between kind of basically putting yourself low so God can be up high. It's saying that with this, like in Matthew 5, it's saying that when you're showing yourself and doing those good deeds, you're doing it for God's glory. But in this one, you're doing it for your self glory to get praise. So it's kind of
very, very good, very good. It's about motivation. It's about what is your motivation for doing the heart deed? What drives you, right, Marvin? The heart. When what we do is done in the right spirit and for the right purpose, it will always be done in the right way. So again, remember, the whole thing Jesus is laying out in the Sermon on the Mount is about the inner world of faith and relationship, the inner drivers and motivators, the Beatitudes, the inward qualities and character of heart, what it means to be salt and light, what it means to embrace the values and the ethics of the kingdom. If those things are embraced, the motivation behind what we do is right. When that kingdom ethic is turned upside down And instead of God, others, and me, it's me. And then God and others, you can kind of fall in, fit in where get in where you fit in. I'm going to be on top. Then the driving motivation for me isn't going to be right. I'm doing the good deeds to be seen, rather than the good deeds that I do are a byproduct of what God is doing in my life. And as I'm going about just living the Christian life, just being salt, just being light, folks are watching, versus I'm doing things to be seen. Two different foundational motivations. And so what Jesus is going to do here now is he now takes us and he identifies three critical areas of spiritual life. Three critical areas of the spiritual life that he gives us guidelines and principles to think about as it relates to what is our motivation. Are we going to have authentic Christianity, or are we going to have religious hypocrisy? And again, just like last week, Jesus identifies three areas. We're going to talk about deeds, we're going to talk about devotions, we're going to talk about disciplines. He's using them as a template for a much broader framework of thought. So he's talking about giving, but he's really talking about deeds in general. He's going to talk about praying, but it's going to give us principles for spiritual devotion in general. He's going to talk about fasting, but it's a guideline for spiritual disciplines in general. So the first area we're going to look at is deeds. And deeds has to do with how our spirituality acts towards others. So look at what he says. Someone read our verse for us.
So when you give to the needy, do not announce it with trumpets, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and on the streets, to be honored by men. I tell you the truth, they have received their reward in full. Okay,
so here it's really important to understand. So when Jesus says here, when you give, giving, or what they called in the Old Testament alms, the giving of alms was required by God. It was required by God to be generous, to give, and not just to give your tithe, but if poor people were on the street, if beggars were on the street, the commandments of God required that you couldn't just walk by that person and not give to them. Because God has a lot to say about the poor and the needy and the response of his people to the poor and the needy. God never says, well, they got there on their own, so just that's on them. Let them pull themselves by their bootstraps and get out of it. God never says that. Man says that. God has a principle about giving. And what he's saying here is, when you give, don't make a big show of it. What are some of the ways in which we've seen this principle of making a show of giving?
Do you mean in a negative way or in a positive way?
Negative way, the negative way, making a show of it, to be honored by men.
When you do things for people and then you go and call everybody, I did so and so for so and so. And appreciate what I did.
Yep.
I would say not only patting yourself on the back, but waiting for somebody else to pat you on the back.
Yeah.
That's good, Mona.
Yeah. I did such and such, and they ain't even pat me on the back.
Yeah.
Feels why you gave, right?
You see a lot of our evangelical churches, a lot of churches do that. Oh, we gave to this, or we give to that, or, to support this, or sometimes you even see like you hear even politicians doing that. Had we gave to this organization or we gave to this organization, really ultimately you was doing it to be seen by men.
Yeah. Think about this, Marv, in some of the environments that you and I were in the Word of Faith. Like I just always think about when we had that prophet come in down in Philly. You know, remember, Marv, the $1,000 giving line?
Yeah.
So what they would do,
Yeah, I had seen that in churches too.
yeah, they would announce how much you're going to give. Like, here's 1,000. If you're giving 1,000, stand over here. If you're giving 500, stand over here. If you give, stand over here. And
Yeah.
lines. And what it would do, it would put pressure on people.
Yeah.
Sure.
It would put pressure on people to give, so that their motive for giving wasn't really to give to God. It was to be seen.
Yeah.
And it was responding to the external pressures of men. And what Jesus is really emphasizing here, again, this goes back to the ethics of the kingdom. God, others, and me. If I'm living by the ethics of the kingdom, then in giving or in my deeds, whether it's giving or any other deed that I do, the driving motivation for it is to please God. Because I want to love God with all my heart, all my mind, all my soul, all my strength. And if I'm loving God with all my heart, all my mind, all my soul, and my strength, then my motivation is to satisfy him. It's to please him. It's to make him happy, right? Not to earn his love, but because I've received his love. So what drives me isn't men doing things in front of men. All we have to do is take a look at people's Facebook pages. That's what I thought about when I thought about this. I thought about how there's very little times when believers today will do stuff and not brag about it on their Facebook pages.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Jay, this really plays out in the nonprofit world, you know, as we're working in the community, right? One of the things we always get back is, well, we want to make sure New Vision is recognized for what they did here. And it's like, but that's not our motive.
That's not
what we're trying to do here. But in the nonprofit world, what I'm learning is that that's what most of these organizations are centered around. Their motive is they want to get credit. And once they get credit, it's going to lead to more recognition and more things down the road.
And more money, more funds.
More money. Yeah, basically more money, more donations, right?
Yeah.
That's what fuels their donations.
Yep. And
I just want to say I was listening all the way down here to Philly, and I was hoping that the conversation got to the point of trying to reconcile. And Pastor Dave, you did such a good job reconciling salt, light, so that men will see and God will be glorified versus this thing. And I'm wondering, is it about, you know, in other scriptures it talks about exalting, and is it a good work exalts something, and is it that our motive, our motive could be to exalt ourselves in that good thing, or to exalt God? Is that the root of this thing that drives our motive? Who are we trying to exalt in this process?
Yep. No, that's it.
Yeah.
Because again, the ethic of the kingdom, the guidelines, the moral values, the governing principle of the kingdom is God, others, then me.
Yeah, Dave, you know, Dave is because before James, you're on point, man, because ultimately I love how when you teach the contrast, Dave, between the kingdom of light and the kingdom of darkness, because Satan knows that we are, you know, God's going to be glorified. Something's going to be magnified and glorified. But what he does is he often has us to focus on ourself versus focusing on God. And that's why Jesus says, listen, be careful, take heed. You know, that's why I felt like he was really putting emphasis on watch the motive of why we do what we do.
Now, at the same time, now this is just my thought. You know, because when you read this, be careful of what you do and make sure you don't announce it with triumph. But now at the same time, God want you to feel good when you do for people. He just don't want you to blast it. Right. Because God feel good when he do for his children. So he want you to feel good when you do for others, but it's all about giving him the glory that you are able to do for others.
Yeah.
Is that so? Because, you know, we as humans feel good when we are able to help other folk.
It's not about how you feel. The emphasis here isn't about how you feel about your action. It's the motive of your action.
Right. When your motives are good, and that's what I'm saying. When your motives are good, when your motives are sincere and good, and you know that you are giving God all the glory inside within yourself, it does make you have that good feeling that, thank you, Lord, that you gave me what I was able to give to somebody else. Is that okay to feel like that though?
No, it is. And Jesus isn't prohibiting that. What Jesus is expressly speaking here in these verses across your deeds, your devotions, and your disciplines as a reflection of your spirituality.
Okay.
His emphasis is primarily on not whether you feel good about what you did.
Oh, okay. Okay.
It's your motive.
Right.
You do.
I got you.
Why do you do what you do?
Yeah.
Your deeds as it relates to other people, the things you do to and for other people, your deeds. What is your motivation? What is your driver for?
Okay.
Is it to be seen by people? Is it to be, watch this, watch what he says. Look at verse 2. Because in every one of these, he uses the word hypocrites. Give to the needy, don't announce it with trumpets as the hypocrites. Now again, what are the hypocrites? The people who are play acting.
Wear mask, right?
Yep, they're play acting, saying lies. Don't do it as an act.
Okay.
To be honored by men, and this is the big thing here. The big emphasis, Jesus.
I have a question about that.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
That's all right.
So is it okay though that when you are doing something or when you are giving, I don't want to say this wrong, but like maybe to ask God to help it make it easier for you to give? Does that make sense?
No, that's fine.
Because like sometimes when you give, you're doing it and you're trying to have like the best intentions, but it's always like, okay, well, if I give this here, then it got to come from somewhere else. God, please help me give this with, you know what I mean? So it's not like you're having bad intentions for it, but like you're nervous maybe about not being, I don't know how to explain it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. So that's a question of faith that you're talking about. What Jesus is emphasizing here, if we look at our text, what Jesus is emphasizing as the evidence of wrong motive to be honored by men. It's not about I'm going to sow a seed and now God, I need you to help me build my faith to believe that there's provision. I want to give and I need you to help me build up my faith so that I can give.
Okay.
That's the development of faith.
Okay.
What Jesus is speaking specifically here and he's going to address this across all three dimensions of our spiritual life, our deeds, our devotions, and our disciplines, is doing it to be honored by men. Because the contrast is, if you're doing it about men, then you ain't getting nothing from God. That's the contrast.
Okay.
What men can give you versus what God can give you.
I was going to say, Dave, see, because he says, when you give, we're already in faith. We're going to do it. Like you said, it's the motive of the heart. But when I seen this, the Lord was showing me, this is why, because we're talking about the good life. The enemy wants us not to live the good life, right? Because our provision comes from God. The more we give, the more God gives to us to give to the needy. So the enemy realizes that if our hearts are not right, if we're just looking to be honored by men, then God, that kind of like hinders God for wanting to bless us to be more of a blessing to other people.
And
right?
Yeah, Marvin, that's perfectly said, because that is the emphasis that Jesus, and we're going to get to this when we get further down. That's the emphasis that Jesus is highlighting. That there's when you have spiritual or religious hypocrisy, there's a reward that comes with it, and that reward is from man. And there's no eternal reward that comes with it. All you get is the praises of men. That's it. That's all you get for it. And when we give, the mindset ought to be this: we are stewards of the resources that God gives us, right?
Right.
Are they ours or are they his?
Right.
And so God, and I didn't want to do this, like go through all these supported verses for each one of these principles, for the sake of time. But God has a lot to say, both in the Old Testament and the New Testament, about giving.
Right.
Right? That it's not really optional for Christians. Like there's some Christians that say, I don't believe in tithing. Then you just don't understand God or the kingdom.
Right.
You just don't want to give, and you're looking for a reason not to give. Because the truth is, tithing isn't the highest standard in the kingdom, it's the lowest standard.
Mm-hmm.
Tithing is just really the beginning point of giving.
Come on, Dave.
And the reality is, when we do what we are required to do,
Mm-hmm.
then you boast about what you're required to do.
Mm-hmm.
We are called to give. We are committed to give.
Come
right.
on.
So when I do what I'm supposed to do,
come on.
I just stop for a moment. When I do what I'm supposed to do, I'm supposed to do good deeds to others.
Right.
That's right.
Supposed to do. What is there to even have an arrogant boast or brag about?
Come
right.
on.
It's like the story Jesus told of the servant, the profitable servant. And this principle is what helped me to be successful in the corporate world. He tells the story of a servant who goes out, works in the field, does his whole thing. He comes in the house, he takes care of his master, gets his master all set up, and then after working in the field all day, cooking, getting his master all set up, he finally sits down and eats.
Mm-hmm.
And asks his disciple, was this servant profitable? And before the disciples could even respond, Jesus says, no, he wasn't profitable, because he only did what he was supposed to do. We're supposed to give. We're supposed to be generous. So if we do what we're supposed to do, where's the boasting?
Wow. Wow.
Where's the arrogance? Because it's what we're supposed to do. And Jesus is laying the contrast out. Listen, there's a reward that the Father has for your good deeds. But if you're looking for your reward from men, pats on the back and the praises of men, then I'm sorry, you'll get that. You'll get that. But what you won't get is what the Father has for you. So look at the other part of that. Verse 3 and 4. He says, but when you give to the needy, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. Why? So that your giving may be in secret. then your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. Now, this whole thing about you're not letting your left hand know what your right hand is doing. What that's really speaking to, again, is your motives. It has to do with clarity of understanding about why you're doing what you're doing. Because, it's as an analogy, it's kind of hard for your left hand for you to be doing something with your left hand and your right hand not know it, right?
Right.
An extreme analogy. It should be done in secret. It should be done without hidden motives. And it should be such a responsive act on our part that my right hand really doesn't have to think about it. That's what he means. It should be such a responsive act for us to give that when I'm driving down Basin Street and I know there's those homeless people that are out there all the time now asking. I always, when I drive by there, I know I'm going to be driving by there. I listen. If I give somebody $5, what am I going to lose? What am I going to lose? I'm not saying I ain't giving them $5. They may go buy liquor with it. What am I going to lose? If I give somebody $5, what am I going to lose from that? It should be instinctive on our part. So instinctive that my right hand really doesn't have to think about or even know what my left hand is doing. That's what he's emphasizing here. And then he says, so that your giving may be in secret. He's not saying hide what you do. He's not saying hide what you do. Don't let anybody know what you do. That's not what he's really saying. What he's really saying is the motive about what you do. Just going about doing what you do. The secret part is not doing it for men's praise, but doing it for God, because watch the way secret is connected. So that your giving may be in secret, and then your Father who does what?
Who sees what is done in secret will reward you.
So the Father habitats what place?
In a secret place.
Secret place. Come on.
So your giving may be in secret. In other words, it's done before an audience of one. That my primary motive for what I do is in the secret place.
Right.
Comes from the audience of one.
One person.
If somebody looks at it and says, man, Shayla did this, man, that was so awesome that Shayla did this. That Jesus isn't saying that's a bad thing. Jesus is saying if Shayla does it because she wants to get props for people, because she wants to show people, here's how spiritual I am.
Right.
When that happens, we rob ourselves of a reward.
Right.
Is that Jesus says, listen, your Father who does what?
Sees.
What do you think it is that God sees in secret?
The motivation of our heart.
Yeah,
Boom.
our heart. Yeah.
Boom.
You know, King James says, we reward you openly.
Right.
Dave.
Mm-hmm. The Father who sees in secret will reward. Now, let me ask you this. Whose reward you want?
Listen.
I want God.
I want the source.
Yeah. I don't care about man's. Yeah.
Listen.
I don't need man's thank you. Yeah.
Better go ahead, Brenda.
I tell you, after 25 years in ministry,
come on.
And I'll praise you today and cuss you out.
And pray on you tomorrow. Exactly.
But if that's your motivation, you know. So that's the first principle that Jesus is laying out for us. First principle Jesus is laying out for us, right? In these three critical areas of spirituality is your deeds. He uses giving, but you can translate that across all of our deeds. All of our deeds towards others, the things we do towards others. That at the heart and essence of it, my left hand shouldn't know what my right hand is doing. Why? Because it's so instinctual. Why is it instinctual? It's the least. I'm supposed to. I'm supposed to be generous. I'm supposed to serve. I'm supposed to give. I'm supposed to love. It's instinctual. It's not calculated. Let me see how I can do this so I can get some props from people. No. And when I was doing this study, God just took me to Facebook. Now hear me out. That's not to say that everybody that posts something on Facebook is doing it for the wrong motives. That's not what I'm saying. It's just simply God said, look at Facebook. You see this principle displayed on Facebook. People doing things for the praises of men. If I really believe that God sees in secret and rewards openly, I don't need your praise. Because whatever you give me is short-lived. What he gives me, snooky now. That's a whole nother deal. So I spent more time on that one than I wanted to. My God, it's 11:30, 11:20. Okay, let's look at this. So he talks about, again, what are the foundational rewards of giving in secret? Well, it's advancing God's kingdom, right? When we do deeds for others, we're advancing God's kingdom, we're helping other people, and we get the experience of God's faithfulness. When I give to others, whether it's my money, whether it's my time, whether it's my talent, I don't have to worry about it taking away something from me, because God is faithful that when I give, there's a law of reciprocity that he provides provision for what I lack in my giving. But if I do it to please men, I don't get any of that. I get none of those benefits. So the next thing that he talks about in the critical areas of spirituality is our devotions. And our devotions are our acts, the things that we do as it relates to God, the things that we do as they relate to God. And here he says, hey, he talks about prayer. Now, prayer in Jesus's day and time was critical and essential. Prayer was structured. There was a lot of form and ritual and tradition that was built around prayer. And God created prayer really as a means of intimacy and relationship and connection with him, but they turned it into something else. And Jesus says, and when you pray, do not be like, again, the hypocrites. Don't be like the people who are play acting. Don't be like the people who are play acting. Why? Because they love to pray standing in the synagogue and on the street corners. And what is their motivation?
To be seen by men.
To be seen by men. Don't be like, when you pray, don't be like the people who are play acting. And what the scribes and the Pharisees in Jesus's day were doing, they made great productions, standing on the street corners, wearing their phylacteries and all of their dress and wardrobe that would highlight them as being spiritual individuals. And they would go through these great theatrical prayers out in public, rather than praying in the temple, in the synagogue, and praying in your closet. And the reason they were doing all this, again, to be seen by men. And Jesus is saying, listen, in your devotion to God, whatever that devotion is, he's talking about prayer, but the broader principle is in your spiritual devotion towards God. If you're doing it to be seen by men, that's your reward. You don't get anything from God. He says, but when you pray, go into your room, close the door, pray to your Father who is unseen. Then your Father who sees what is done in secret, he will reward you. And when you pray, do not keep on babbling like pagans. Why? Because they think the more words they say, the more they're going to be heard. Don't be like them, because God already knows what you need. before you even ask him. So you ain't got to go through all that. And the essence here is really this: your devotion to God. So what are the other things besides prayer that is a devotion, that's part of our spiritual life, that's a devotion towards God?
Fasting.
Okay, fasting is a discipline. Any others?
Wouldn't it be singing, praising?
Worship. Yep.
Worship.
Obedience.
Yeah, obedience. That's a good one, Mona.
Studying and meditating on the word.
Yep. All of these things that we do that symbolize our devotion to God. The primary is the core essence is your prayer and your worship, right? The spiritual devotions towards God, right? And think about in our church services. You know, that person that every Sunday they got to have a Holy Ghost moment.
Wow.
We go
What
on.
is that?
We don't even need to touch on that, do we? We can go on down the list.
Yeah.
Right? Doing things to be seen by others. This is prayer, but it's the principle of our spiritual devotions that it should be driven by an audience of one.
God.
It could be, listen, it could be your worship. You know, I was a worship singer and leader for a long time. You know, people who they love doing it because they want the attention rather than God. So they're not singing to God, they're singing to the crowd.
Yep.
You're not shouting to God, you're shouting to draw attention to yourself, how spiritual you are.
Or how well you can sing.
So all of that stuff, Jesus is highlighting here that it's contradictory to the ethics of the kingdom. And here Jesus saying, listen, when you commune with God, when you have devotion with God, it should be done out of secret. In other words, it shouldn't be about how others view you and others see you. It shouldn't be a show. It shouldn't be a production. And I think what feeds into this is just the way that we've created church. The way we've created church and the way we do church, I think it adds fuel to people doing things to be seen by others. Because we praise the people who are seen. And we ignore the people who aren't seen. So if you want attention, you got to try to be seen.
Yep.
But here, look in verse 6, he says, but listen, when you pray, or when you have your devotion of God, make it about God. He says, go into your room, close the door. The application is, when you have devotion with God, make it about God, not anybody else. God. That phrase, go into your room, some of your translations might say your closet. And people have taken that to mean you got to have like a private prayer space. What that word closet, where we get the phrase prayer closet comes from, is, you ever see the prayer shawls that Jews wear? Here's what they would do. The really devout Jews, when they prayed, they didn't make the big show of it. They would pull their prayer shawl over their head and then bring the edges together. Kind of like, I don't have a shawl, but they would go like this and together like that. That was called their prayer closet. And And right there in the synagogue around everybody else, they were communing with God. What they were saying was between them and God. It wasn't about everybody else. It wasn't about the production. It was about them and God. When you would worship, it's about you and God. It's not about everybody else. It's about you and God. And I think that a lot of times we're too mindful of other people when we do our devotion. When we pray, we're too mindful of what people will think about our prayer. Are we going to say the right words? Are we going right? Are we going to sound like so and so? We going to sound like this person? Well, I ain't going to pray because I don't sound like that person.
That's true. And that's why a lot of people don't pray.
Right. Yep.
It's the same spirit. It's the same. It's not an active expression of the spirit. It's a passive expression of the spirit.
Mm-hmm.
You're concerned what people think. So one expression is I do it because I want people to think positively about me. And the passive expression is I don't do it because I'm afraid what people are going to think about me.
That's good. That's good.
Just being an audience of one. When I worship, man, listen, it's God. I ain't talking about y'all.
Right.
That's what I hit myself up. But listen, I ain't thinking about y'all.
I know that's right.
Because listen, take this wrong. Please don't take this wrong. Weren't none of y'all there when I was in that crack house?
There it is. Go ahead.
And I called on Jesus.
Go ahead, Pastor.
That's right.
And when none of them there when you was going through what you're going through. That go ahead.
So like our devotion has to be God-centered. That's what he means. When you pray to your Father who's unseen, do it secretly. Engage God in the secret place. And again, the secret place where God sees is the motives of our heart. Not the external, it's internal. And God promises, I see you. I see you and I see the real reason why you do it. You can deceive yourself, you can deceive everybody else, but I see in secret. I see what's going on in your heart, the secret places of your heart. Man looks at the outward, I look at the inside. And I have a reward that I will either give or withhold based on what your motivation is. I have a reward that I will either give or withhold based on what your motivation is. All right, we're running out of time, so let me get to the end of this real quick. So here are the rewards of praying in secret. Again, it's not just praying, it's our spiritual devotions. Greater intimacy with God, clearer guidance, greater peace. God says, if your motives aren't right, I'm withholding these things from you.
Greater peace.
But if your motives are right, if you have an audience of one for your devotion, if it's in the secret place, it's about you and me. I am first, others are second, and you're last. This is the reward. Greater intimacy. And man, listen, you got intimacy with God. You got everything you need. Last thing. So the deeds as it relates to others, the devotions as it relates towards God, and then he talks about the disciplines. And these are the acts toward ourselves. He says, when you fast, don't look somber as the people who are play acting. See, every one of these, he says, the people who are play acting. This is what the actors do. This is what the religious hypocrites do. They look somber. They disfigure their faces. Why? So the people will know they're fasting. They want everybody to know they're fasting. They fasting Then they go out to lunch with you, and you say, "Hey, man, you know, what do you order?" "Oh man, no, I'm fasting."
Mm.
Well, you should have just kept your tail where you were.
Mhm.
Want people to know you're fasting. You want to make a show of it. And in Jesus' day, they would put on sackcloths and ashes, and they would sit on the corners. And then when people would come around, right, they would put more ashes on themselves. They wanted to give a show of spirituality, a form of spirituality that was really external. It was really about just putting a show on for people. He's talking about fasting, but he's really talking about the disciplines that we build into our lives, that we build into our spirituality. Fasting, Bible study, right? The things that we do that are denial of self, the disciplines that we have, whether that discipline is rising in the morning, all these other things that we do. What's the motivation for them? And they were fasting, and they turned fasting into something that God said, "Listen, I didn't ask you to do that. That's not why I called you. That's not why I called you to fast." The Old Testament didn't really emphasize fasting. It was the scribes and the Pharisees. They turned it into something more than what God had asked. The scribes and the Pharisees, they fasted 2 days a week, on Mondays and Thursdays. And today, even as Christians, we've turned it into the same kind of spiritual thing. Christians today kind of use it as a means of paying for their sins. "Oh man, I sinned, I did this or did this, let me fast." Right? Kind of this self-discipline, this self-chastisement. Or as a way to twist God's arm to get an answer to prayer. Well, all right, I need an answer, God. Let me pray, because if I pray and fast, now God's obligated to answer me. But that's not what God said fasting was. And they had lost sight of it, and they turned it into this outward show. In Isaiah 58:6, this is what God says: "Is not this the kind of fasting I have chosen? To loose the chains of injustice and unite the cords of the yoke, to set the oppressed free and to break every chain? Is it not to share your food with the hungry and to provide the poor wanderer with shelter? When you see the naked, to clothe them, and not to turn away from your own flesh and blood?" In other words, God was saying, Israel, you're going through all of this actions, all of this religious stuff, all of this hypocritical stuff, but that's not why I called you to fast. I called you to fast for deeper spiritual reasons. I didn't call you to fast for external things. I called you to fast to deal with what's deficient on the inside of you. Here, he says, but when you fast, Jesus says, listen, don't be like the hypocrites. But when you do it, don't let everybody know. Comb your hair, wash your face. Get yourself together. Why? Because it's not about making sure everybody knows you're fasting, making sure everybody knows whatever it is that you're doing as part of your spiritual disciplines. Because if you're doing the spiritual disciplines for the right reason, everybody will see the results, because they'll see the increase of the fruit of the Spirit in your life. And again, he ends with this contrast. It's about what God sees. It's not about what others see. And again, he says, and your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. What are the rewards? It creates spiritual hunger. Real spiritual devotion creates more spiritual hunger. If you're not really hungry for God, check your spiritual disciplines and your motives for your spiritual disciplines. He says it'll create deliverance from strongholds. And it increases your spiritual revelation. These are the rewards that God gives. Man can't give you this. Only God can give you this. So here's how all of this stuff looks. If you want to put it all together in as we conclude, time got away. Gosh. The two forms of spirituality. Religious hypocrisy or spiritual authenticity. Hypocrisy is focused on external forms. It's done to impress people. And the reward is what others think about you. Their applause, looking good in front of other people. But authentic Christianity, spiritual authenticity is about the internal attitudes, the things in secret. The motive is to relate to and serve God, driven not by effort, but motivated and driven by grace. And the reward is there's a growing intimacy and relationship with God. That as I do these things, I know God better. Versus the hypocrisy, I do all these things and I don't grow and I don't learn anything new or more about God. That's what Jesus is highlighting for us. Across these three areas of spirituality, our deeds, our devotions, and our disciplines. And the emphasis that Jesus is putting for us, it isn't really the reward itself, but the spiritual growth in life. That what the reward facilitates in our life, which is spiritual growth. Those of us, when we fall into the trap of just making a show of our spirituality, religious hypocrisy, it's really evidence that our lives are being driven by the flesh and not by the spirit. And when our lives are driven by the flesh, it's impossible to have spiritual growth. We go through all these activities, we do all these actions, but it doesn't produce growth. So I'm sure everybody has seen this iceberg principle, right? And when you look at the iceberg, this is what Jesus is saying. This is what he's saying in a nutshell. Our public spirituality should grow out of our private spirituality. So what people see on the surface of our life should really come from what they don't see in terms of the private spirituality in our lives, the things that we do in secret, the things that cultivate our relationship and intimacy with God. That when our spirituality is solely driven by just the public piety, it's evidence that we're being driven by the flesh. The real evidence of our relationship with God isn't what people see. It's the private spirituality. That's where the authenticity comes, so that what people do see is what God produces and not what the flesh produces simply to give an appearance. Let me do it here because we're out of time. This took much longer than I anticipated. So Jesus ends We'll end here and we'll wrap this up and we'll have some time for discussions, and then we'll take communion. But Jesus, again, he says, don't do your acts of righteousness, your deeds, your devotions, your disciplines. Don't do them to be seen. Because if you do, you will have no reward from your Father in heaven. And notice, Jesus isn't talking about punishment. He's not talking about punishment for spiritual hypocrisy. He never states there's a punishment directly for spiritual hypocrisy. But what does he tell us is the consequence of spiritual hypocrisy?
You don't get a reward from him.
You don't get the reward. That's the consequence. You don't get from God. You can't receive from God. Both in this life and the life to come. Remember when the people came to Jesus in Matthew 25 and they said, Lord, we did this in your name. We did that in your name. We did this in your name. We fed people. We clothed people. We visited people. We did all of this stuff in your name. Remember what Jesus' response to them was?
Wasn't it? He didn't know them.
He said, away from me.
Right.
Nope.
Get away from me. I don't, right.
He never said to them, you ain't do that. He never denied. He never denied the deeds, the devotions, and the disciplines that they said they had done. Jesus simply said, I ain't know you. Here's what he's saying. You didn't do that for me.
Right.
Your motives was wrong. You did that to be seen. When we do the right thing for the wrong motives, we lose our reward. And the reason why this is so important is, again, I'll close here. The ethic of the kingdom that we laid out last week is God, others, and me. And when we practice spiritual hypocrisy, forget about what others do. When we practice spiritual hypocrisy, we are turning upside down the ethic of the kingdom. That's why Jesus, coming right after laying the principles for the kingdom, he comes right after and says, listen, here's how this stuff looks in regards to your deeds, to your devotions, and your disciplines. Because you could do this stuff, the right thing, for the wrong motives and the wrong way. And if you lose sight of the ethic and you make it about you and you put yourself above God and others, the chances that you will be a religious hypocrite is very high, because your motives will be about you and not God and others. That is the essence that Jesus is laying out here, a reinforcement of the ethics of the kingdom as it relates to the way that we engage with others, the way that we engage with God, and the way that we engage ourselves in terms of our deeds, our devotions, and our disciplines. And the question is, what reward you want? What reward do you want? So any thoughts or comments before we take communion?